Hey folks, I'm Jack Fossett, and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about how to get some great tones out of this guitar, the Epiphone Sheraton. We're going to dive right in a minute. We're going to start with some of my favorite tones and then talk about how to get some cool tones and some classic inspired tones one by one as we go along. We've got a lot to get to, so let's get started. Before we jump in, if you like my channel, please follow the Bandcamp link below where you can listen to some tunes. If you enjoy one that you hear, please download it and share it with your friends. It would be a big help to the channel. Let's get going. Hope you enjoy. So, this is the Epiphone Sheraton 2. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this model just to get started. Now, this is a mid-2000s Sheraton 2, and this is not a Sheraton 2 Pro, which is important to mention mostly because it has an older set of pickups and because it does not have the push-pull pods. That being said, a lot of the tone tips are really going to apply to modern Sheraton 2 Pros, earlier 90s Sheratons, which were different but similar. You can use a lot of these tips pretty much across the board because the model has been relatively similar. This is for the modern Sheraton that has humbuckers as opposed to a vintage style one that would have had mini humbuckers. The amplifier that I'm playing for this to show you how these tips can really work in a lot of different settings is the amp next to me, which is the Fender Mustang GTX 100. And I've heard from a lot of people saying that you want to hear kind of some tone tips at for a reasonable amp. It's easy to plug a guitar into a super reverb and have it sound great, or a Fender Bassman, but not everybody has those types of amps accessible. So I wanted to do it into this type of amp. This is a digital modeling amp. It's the newest one in the Fender Mustang line, and show you how these tone tips can really apply in a much more budget-friendly way. So to get started, we'll talk a little bit about this guitar. This is a 2-pickup setup. It has the 2 volumes and 2 tones with your 3-way toggle switch. Again, if you have the Pro, it's also going to have the push-pull coil splitting. I'm honestly not a fan of coil splitting from any company except PRS. That's my little spiel about that. I think PRS does it well. Other companies I have not found do it well. And this really shines as a dual humbucking guitar. What's unique about it is it's brighter than you would expect. And a lot of budget-friendly semi-hollow or hollow body guitars, you tend to expect to sound kind of muddy. That's generally speaking, for a hollow body guitar, budget friendly would be something under $1,000. If you have something under 1,000 US dollars, you can expect that it is more of a, I want to say, consumer level, which does mean that they need to cut some corners to get it to you at that price. So it probably won't have top hardware, it probably won't have top wiring. Sometimes that can lead to pickups sounding a little bit dull and muddy. Now these pickups are brighter than you would expect, and this guitar has a lot of brightness to it. However, the cool thing about it is that you get brightness where you wouldn't otherwise expect it. The downside is that sometimes it can have a slight shrillness to it. Almost sounds like you have the treble way up on your amp, but the presence pulled back a little bit, and there's this, it's bright, but it has this little kind of harsh honk to it. So one of the things that I like to do is to tame that a little bit by backing off the volume and the tone just ever so slightly. Now that intro clip that you heard, kind of the bluesy clip, was like that. I was on the neck pickup and I had the volume rolled off to probably like 8.5, and the same with the tone, maybe a little bit more like 7.5, 8. And that gets you this kind of, it sort of eases the signal a little bit and kind of adds just a nice little bit of squish sagginess to your tone, responsiveness that I really like. That also works if you're playing clean. So I want to start off here with a clean tone. I'm going to go into a Fender style clean, and the EQ is set pretty standard, slightly pushed mid, slightly pushed treble. When I say slightly pushed, I mean above 5, and the bass is just slightly pulled a little below 5. Now for this clip, I'm doing the same thing. I've got the volume and the tone backed off just a little bit. Check out how you can get some great clean tones using that volume and tone trick. Now again, I mentioned that that intro clip was on the neck and that was with the volume and the tone backed off slightly. Now for that I kept it on the neck. I'm going to do that same thing with that same slightly more overdriven tone, also a Fender amp model. I'm going to switch to the bridge pickup so that you can hear how it gets kind of a cool, squishy, slightly vintage style, kind of like a country blues rock tone. It's not hugely aggressive, but it's a great bridge, kind of, again, Americana rock tone. Check out this tone. Next, we're going to get clean again. Now, one of the most famous Epiphone Sheraton players was John Lee Hooker, the very famous and excellent blues guitar player. He really liked Epiphone Sheratons. And typical of a lot of old blues tones, you can get really cool old blues tones, especially if you pull the bass on your amp and push a little bit of reverb. Now, some of this was fashion over function. If you wanted to be heard in a big band mix on stage and they didn't have all kinds of fancy live sound equipment like we have nowadays, you'd really need to pull the bass, because bass is what muddies up your tone and kind of conflicts with like the drums and the bass player. So you'll hear a lot of these old blues tones that are way thinner than modern blues tones. Now, John Lee Hooker did a great cover of Jimi Hendrix's Red House, which I believe was on a Hendrix tribute album, and this is a tone kind of inspired by his performance on that. So again, I'm using a Fender amp model. I've pulled the bass big time and pulled the mids a little bit too. It's got mostly treble with a lot of a spring reverb sound, and I'm playing clean. Now in this one, I actually have the tone and the volume wide open. So check out this really cool sort of vintage inspired, John Lee Hooker inspired blues tone. Check it out. Now, while we're on the vintage vibe, let's also talk about jazz, because a lot of players might want to get this guitar for jazz. Now, it would sound great with flat wounds. I'm not going to do flat wounds for this video, but I do want to show you how you can get a great jazz tone out of this guitar. And the crude way to get a jazz tone for a lot of players is to just roll your tone back, and I don't like that. I think that just makes your guitar sound muddy. A good jazz tone, in my opinion, has more to do with the type of amp that you use and backing off the EQ on your amp and keeping your guitar dialed in more open. In this tone, I actually have the guitar's tone and volume wide open, and I have the EQ on the amp model backed way off, way down to like 3 on pretty much all of the EQ settings, treble, middle, and bass. Check out this kind of cool, classic, sort of softer jazz tone. All right, now we're going to get into more gain. Now, one of the more modern famous players who was known to use at times an Epiphone Sheraton was Noel Gallagher of Oasis. This guitar, with its center block, with its dual humbucking pickups, it can also get aggressive and be a great rock machine for those who want it. So this is going to be kind of another take on the second tone that I did in the intro, which is kind of 90s rock inspired. And I'm not going for a specific Noel Gallagher or Oasis tone, just something that was kind of 90s inspired. I'm actually using a pushed Vox tone on the modeling amp with a plate reverb that has a little bounce to it to kind of simulate a studio sound. Just made me think 90s when I played this tone. And again, for this one, I actually have the volume and the tones wide open, doing some bridge pickup stuff. And then I want to show you one other thing that you can do. This is for some cool rhythm. It works great for rock rhythm, but you can use it for other things too. And this is really a tip for all dual humbucking guitars or dual pickup guitars, where each pickup has their own volume. When you go to the middle, so like let's say you want kind of a bassy rhythm tone, but your neck pickup is a little too bassy. So one of the things you can do is you can switch to the middle and then back off the treble volume just a bit. And it works vice versa also. Like, let's say you want a little bit more of a biting and aggressive rhythm tone, but the bridge pickup is just a little too much. Well, you can flip to the middle and back off the neck volume a little bit. So in the midst of this clip, I'm going to go from the bridge and I'm going to switch back to the middle and kind of roll those each back a little bit so you can hear. It's a subtle difference, but sometimes subtleties are what can make the difference between, you know, a decent tone and a really great tone. So check out this kind of cool 90s inspired rock rhythm-ish, lead-ish tone, and we're going to do that trick with the pickup setting in the middle. Check this out. All right, the last tones we're going to work with here are for a little bit heavier rock. This guitar can get aggressive and it can get some really cool heavier rock tones. I've, believe it or not, heard from some people who want to do like a Guns N' Roses type thing using this type of guitar. And I did want to show you how it will handle some heavier sounding rock tones a little bit. You do need to be careful of that in a live setting because it will feedback, and if you use a lot of gain, it will feedback like a banshee. So the important thing then is to kind of ride your guitar volume, not go overboard on the EQ on your amp is a big one. The more gain that you use, well, really the more volume you play with in general. Make sure that you don't push particularly the mids and the bass a ton. Mids and bass tend to be the culprits the most for feedback. Treble will also feedback. It doesn't feedback as quickly, but the difference is when it does feedback, it's just really, really awful. Like, you know, the Nazgul in Lord of the Rings? If you get treble feedback in an amp, it makes the Nazgul sound like Sarah McLachlan. That's kind of what we're talking about with treble feedback. Bass and mids are the ones that tend to feedback the quickest. If you have a really heavy bass sound or a really heavy dialed in mids and you go to hit a chord, it just fills up so quickly. And again, treble you get a little more leeway with, but it just sounds so miserable when the treble feeds back. So you can do cool harder rock tones with this guitar. You do have to be careful of feedback, but for this last tone, just want to share with you, I'm going into a Silver Jubilee model that's in the GTX, which that kind of harkens back a little bit to that 80s rock sound. And on the neck pickup, I'm going to have the tone rolled way back to get this kind of cool filtered lead tone. So check out how this guitar can do some heavier rock sounds. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that this has helped you learn how you can get some really cool tones out of the Epiphone Sheraton 2. Please let us know in the comments, do you play an Epiphone Sheraton? You can also use a lot of these tips with the DOT, with the ES335 that Epiphone makes, or you can use some of these tips even with Gibson guitars and other dual humbucking semi-hollow guitars, whether it be an Ibanez or a D'Angelico or whatnot. Let us know in the comments what you have, if there are any unique tips that you use when you're dialing in this type of guitar. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and remember to follow the link below where you can check out some of my music. And again, please download anything that you like and share it with your friends. I'm Jack Fossett. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.